coloured, which are really quite extraordinary. And I do hope he mentions colorization technique, which is something I have tried with spectacular failure, I might add. Both books are unavailable on Amazon, but readily available on the web. Although this presentation will be of great interest to genealogists, I hope the non-genealogists will find this topic to be as fascinating as I do. By the way, for the genealogists, the Waterloo Public Library has a free digital resource, Ancestry.com, where family history can be researched for free. As Peggy said, there will be time for questions and answers after the talk. This presentation will be recorded and posted under the events on the UWRA website. I will now finish with a quotation taken from Stephen's book, Dating by Design. Once you delve into the history of old photographs, it can lead you down many avenues that can educate and enlighten. And I'm always glad to be educated. So thanks. Go ahead, Stephen. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. It seems very strange for me sitting here in my little office in Bury in Lancashire to see the books there over in Canada. So I'm delighted they arrived, but it's lovely to see. I believe at the moment there is something like 30 or 40 copies over in Canada now. So it seems the word seems to be spreading. Right, yeah, understanding old photographs. Now, it's a bit of a strange thing to say, isn't it? Understanding your photographs. But what I hope to do by the end of the talk is to get you to appreciate and look at your old photographs that you may have in any collections or you may come across and look at them in a different way. And so there is going to be some technical things, but I try and keep the technical down a little bit, but I might, seeing as you're from a technical university, I might edge that back up again. I don't work to a script, so I make it up as I go along. And I will do, James, about colorization at the end. There's a section towards the end, okay? So we'll come on to that. So I'll just go on to screen share and hopefully that will work. Or was this time when, right, hopefully, Peggy, can you just give me a nod? Yep, that's lovely. So yeah, understanding your old photographs. Now, this might seem a strange thing to say. What do you really see when you look at a photograph? I don't know about you, but sort of, if you've got old photographs of your family, when you look at them, you probably look at the faces. That sounds fairly strange, fairly obvious, doesn't it? But what I hope to be able to teach you to do today is to look further around the picture. And I'm going to try and prove how little you see right from the word go. And I'm going to show you a short clip of film. And in this film, there's a young girl. And I want you to do something for me. So right from the word go, I'm going to get you working. And I want you to look closely at your screens, whatever you're viewing on, and follow what this young girl does. All she does really is walk across the screen, but I want you to follow her. And I want you to see what she does. And I want you to believe that she is your daughter, your granddaughter, your niece. She is somebody that you know and care for. That's important, okay? So let me just bring the picture up and set it going. Now, she's going to turn up on the left-hand side of the screen. So if you keep an eye on the left-hand side of the screen, near where that red shop is, and I think she should appear in a second. Here she is. So just watch what she does. She's walking down the road. She's wearing a pink top. She's got some red mini skirts, boots. Yeah. And now she has gone. Okay. I'll show you that again at the end of the talk. Okay. Let's go back in time. 1968. My older brother left home and went working in the south of England. And where we were at the time was a fairly industrial sort of area, not far from where I am now. And when he was going, my dad said, you're not leaving home without a camera, because I want you to be able to send photographs. We want to see where you're living. We can't just pop down. It was a 250, 300-mile drive. We can't just pop down for the weekend, you know. We only had a very, very tiny little car at the time. And so he went off with a Kodak 25, sort you've got, you can see on screen, the sort with a, you know, drop-in cartridge. And after about 3, maybe 4 weeks, a packet of photographs arrived, the 3-inch by 3-inch black and white prints. And in amongst them, there was pictures of his friends, pictures of where he was staying and where he was working. And there was this picture of a tree and a fence and a bit of grass. And all the other photographs, we could understand clearly why he'd taken the picture. But this one we couldn't. So we wrote back to him, thanking him for the photographs and saying, thanks, Andy, for the photos, but why did you send us the picture of the tree and the fence? And we got a reply back after about 3 weeks, hadn't we seen the squirrel? Now, where we were, there weren't any squirrels. And he'd been there with his camera, saw a squirrel, and it was really important to him. But I'm sure you've had the same thing where you look through a viewfinder at something, particularly wildlife, they're the worst, and it seems really big when you see it in real life. And yet, when you see it on the print or you see it on a digital photograph these days, it's really small and almost, you know, non-existent. Now, all your photographs, when you think about it, all the photographs that you have in your collections are the same. Unless you were there, unless you took it, you don't know why it was taken. There may be something hiding in that picture which is of interest to you, or was of interest to the original photographer. Okay. Now then, this lady. Now you come from place Waterloo. This lady would have been alive at the time of the Battle of Waterloo. She was possibly born at the time of the French Revolution. The picture is a daguerreotype, and a daguerreotype is a coating of silver on a sheet of copper. And you can see on the picture that there are stripes. There's sort of lines going across the picture, and that's where the coating of silver has been brushed onto the copper plate. The process, or the film, the image, should I say, not the film, the image was processed in hot mercury fumes. Now, when I was a child, and I'm sure many of you are the same, when as a child we were able to get our hands onto mercury, we played like marbles with it. It wasn't considered to be particularly dangerous, but obviously we know better now. And many of the photographic assistants who were processing daguerreotypes, they actually went mad because of handling this mercury and the mercury fumes. But when we look at this lady, we see a number of things. We see the light in her eyes. We're looking how she was in around about 1850 or 1845. And her hair is really tight, isn't it? She's got dabs of gold on the earrings that have been painted on. She's got a slight bit of pinking in the cheeks where that's been painted on at the time the photograph was produced. But she's the opposite of the squirrel, because she's probably not the subject of the photograph. When we see the photograph as a whole, we can see that she's actually hanging on tightly to an infant. Now, that infant would have had to sit still for up to 30 seconds when this photograph was taken. Can you imagine hanging on to a child of that age for that long? So probably the main reason that the lady's there is to hang on to the child. Now, daguerreotypes are more likely to be found in America and Canada than they are in the UK. And there's a very good reason for that. And it's down to cost. In the UK, it was extremely expensive. Pardon me, the photographer had to have a license and buy a license from the French. The rest of the world, they didn't. It was just in the UK. And it was so expensive that somebody like Anne Bronte, who in 1842, she was working as a governess, and her annual income as a governess, she would have had to spend 2 months' wages to get one daguerreotype image. So it explains why there's no photographs of the Brontes. But how to tell if you've got a daguerreotype or a different type of photograph? And I'm going to try and demonstrate this on my little camera in front of me by putting a light on up here. And I'm going to show this to my camera. So you need to look at my little camera screen now. And I'm going to tilt it backwards. And as I tilt it backwards, it flips into being a negative. So there it's a negative, and there it's a positive. There's nothing magic about the light. All I'm doing is catching the image in a certain position. Oh, I've lost it. And it becomes a negative. Now that's a surefire sign that you've got a daguerreotype. And they can be very, very detailed. Dates-wise in the UK, 1840, 1850, Canada, 1840 to 1860. That's particularly in America, because 1861 started the American Civil War. They needed the copper for the munitions. So it disappeared really quite suddenly in 1861. If you have got one of these, please don't take them apart. I take them apart, but that's only because I buy them in to do that, so that I can work on them and learn about them. But if you take one of these apart, the image is actually sealed, or it should be sealed, so that air can't get at it, because otherwise the sheet of copper tarnishes. Now, this is from a daguerreotype, and I have the daguerreotype here. Just try the same. Let me just do it the same trick again. And it should, yeah, there we go. It's flipped into being a negative. Yeah, and there it's a positive. And this one is interesting because it shows us something that is inherent in a daguerreotype, and that is the long exposure. If we look at the young lady, we can see that she's looking at the camera. She's managed to maintain quite a decent expression for quite a long time. This is a little bit later than the other one, but still probably around about 1850, 1855. And the exposure by then would have been probably in the order of 15 seconds, 20 seconds. She's managed to maintain a decent expression. The young man on the right-hand side, you can tell he is staring at the camera. He's got water in his eyes. He's literally sort of forcing his eyes open. And the young girl in the middle has moved a little bit and have blinked during the exposure. But I've also colorized it. Now, I've colorized it for a very good reason. As babies, when we're born, we are instinctively drawn to faces, our parents' faces, mother's face especially. We tend to see in those very early days as a child, and certainly premature babies, often see just in black and white until sort of the colour takes over. It usually comes pretty quickly, but we see in light and dark in those very early days. And when we look at an old photograph, we instinctively look at the person's face and their eyes. We tend not to let our eyes wander around the rest of the picture. But if you think of the picture, what would it look like in colour? What were they wearing? What colours were these people wearing? Your eye will wander more, and you will see more and get more out of it. More of that later. Moving on a bit in time, the next process that took over from the daguerreotype was the ambrotype, and this is the silver coating on glass, and on the back of the glass there is a black shellac varnish. Now, this was a customer's original that was passed to me. And the lady whose photograph it was said, I think it's a husband and wife, but I'm not sure. What can I tell her about it? Well, I can tell a number of things about it. And one of them is that it's quite an early one. If you look at the surround, the brass surround, it's actually a material called pinchbeck. But if you look at it in detail, it's been hand done. It's been hand engraved, particularly around the bottom and down the sides. Now, the Victorians loved decoration. And as we'll see in a minute, so the later ones were very elaborate and highly stamped in the design. So that somebody's had a go at doing this themselves, possibly on an early one, and they want to add more decoration. Now, with an ambrotype, you can take it apart if you're careful. And I took this one apart in order to be able to work on it and find out more about it. And I could see straight away that when I took the border off, I could see the bottom of the lady's skirt. And I could just about make out an angle of a box that she's standing on. So is it husband and wife? When we look closely at the girl's face, she's blind. So is it a husband and wife? It could be, but it also could be something like a father and daughter. And he's just there, just like the lady was supporting the child, the infant, he could just be there to support her whilst she has her photograph taken. We don't know because we weren't there, but the more information we can gather, the more knowledge we've got of about our ancestors. Now, this is a slightly larger sized ambrotype, and I'm going to try and do the same again on here to show it to the light. So there's the positive on screen, and I angle it back to the light, and it stays as a positive. So there we have a positive. It stays a positive. So this is now proof that we've got an ambrotype is on glass. And here in for Canada, we've got dates of about 1845 to 1880. Look at the border, the surround. Now it's fully decorated. It's really intricately decorated and stamp decorated. But what about the picture? Now, in this instance, the gentleman is probably not related to the hat. The hat is almost certainly a prop supplied by the photographer. And one of the reasons for saying that is his hands. The gentleman's hands are the hands of a manual worker, very, very heavy manual work. They are mangled, literally. So he's not the sort of person really who is likely to be wearing a top hat on a daily basis. But he wants to look the part, and he's got his picture taken with the top hat. Now, a lot of people will have these, and they have different terms. They could be called tintypes. I think in Australia it's melanotypes. The proper name is ferrotype because it's on a sheet of iron, not a sheet of tin. And they are rather dark and dirty and very thin. Occasionally they will be framed in like the others ones were. And they've almost always got a little notch out of a corner, sometimes more than one, but usually one corner is notched. And that's because that's the side, for the photographer, when he's in the darkroom, to be able to know which side he's painted on. Yeah, he's painted the emulsion on. And it's a photographic emulsion on a sheet of iron. And if I said to you that this is the longest lasting photographic process there has ever been, it would probably surprise you. But starting around about 1860s and going right on almost to the 1940s, certainly to the 1930s. And in the latter stages, it was being used by seaside photographers, set up on a beach in a little tent, and people would come and have the photographs taken. And here is one such photograph. And this is my dad. I can, even though it's dark and dirty, I can tell it's my dad. and I can see that he's wearing a school uniform. I can see he's got a bucket and spade, so he's on a beach. Beyond that, I can't see much at all. And I've put up there, so photographer B. Gill, is my granddad the photographer? I don't know who the photographer is at this stage. What I do know is that all tintypes or ferrotypes, ambrotypes, and daguerreotypes are all back to front. They're all laterally reversed. So if I'm restoring one of these, what I do is to return them the right way around. Certainly whilst I'm working on them, because I can see how it was at the time. And when I turn it round and brighten it up, I can see my granddad in the background, and he sat on the floor with a hat on. And I can see that there's a child there, and they're a little bit blurred because they've moved during the exposure. We've probably got now an exposure of half a second, a quarter of a second, something like that. I've also got a location. Redcar. Now, Redcar is a little seaside resort in the northeast coast of Yorkshire. And how could I possibly know that that little piece of iron has recorded an image in 1928 on the beach at Redcar? There's no information in the album that it was in. It was just there, stuck in this album. But the information is there nevertheless. It's there in the background, on that tent in the background. And I'll translate it for you. It says, Borough of Redcar, all waste paper, banana skins, etc. must be deposited in the wire baskets by order of the council. That is on that tiny, small, little, dirty piece of iron that's been passed from hand to hand down our sort of family. And it's containing these little bits of history. Now, that lady is my maternal grandmother. And when I saw this, it's printed onto a postcard, I thought, oh, my grandma's on a day out with some friends. She was a mill worker, a cotton mill worker in Lancashire. And I can tell from the hat that it is almost certainly around about 1910, give or take a year or two either side, 1910. So the date is not a problem on this one. When I start to restore it, I notice something. I notice that all the ladies, and they are all ladies, have all got corsages or are carrying the same flower. Why? Why should this bunch of women on a day out all decide to have the same flower? It's not like today where they're on a hen do and they're all wearing t-shirts, but there's something joining these ladies together. What is it? And then I remember back to my days as a photographer. If I'm doing a group photograph, I will put the important person in the middle. Yeah, makes sense. You ask Donald Trump. Yeah, trying to elbow his way into the middle. Who's in the middle? Well, my grandma's in the middle. But then I look around and look in the middle and I think that face looks familiar. That lady there is Christabel Pankhurst, Emmeline Pankhurst's daughter, who went round the area recruiting ladies into the suffragette movement and encouraging people to support them. So because my grandma's in the picture, I miss the reason why it was taken. I didn't see the squirrel, and the squirrel was Emmeline Pankhurst and not my grandma. Now, moving on a little bit in time to the carte de visite, the visiting card. And this was invented, if you can use that word, by André and Adolphe Disderi in Paris in 1860 or thereabouts. And he worked out, he produced a camera that could take 8 photographs on one sheet of glass, one large negative. And this is one of them. And I want you now to start thinking the context. And that is, take yourself away from the photographer. Look at the picture on the back, or the image on the information on the back. It says Disderi & Co. Photographers, Boulevard des Italiens, Paris. In the days when this was taken, there were hardly any photographers, so they didn't need to do much advertising. A name and address was always needed. On the front of the card, we've got the name Disdairy & Co, and it's quite simply printed, and it's signed Sir Robert Peel, who was the UK Foreign Secretary, I think he was at the time. The card itself has got square corners. It's cut square on the outside corners. Now that's a good sign that it's before 1870, because round about 1870, they switched to round corners. But the thing that interests me about this picture, and you won't be able to see this really, is that his shoes are dirty. Now, why would such an important person of the British government's shoes be dirty? Think of the context. Think of the context as what's going on in Paris in 1862 when this was taken. The housemans were remodeling all the centre of Paris. The boulevards that existed would have probably not have paved roads. There was certainly, no cars. So it was horse and carts and carriages and so on. So there's horse muck everywhere and probably dirt in the street. So he's got dirty shoes. By looking for the detail, you can link these historical contexts in. Now, this is one of the most important family photographs that there's ever been. And I have one here, that one that you see on screen. In May 1861, Queen Victoria commissioned Mayall in London to photograph Prince Albert, which he did, produce this portrait. Unfortunately, he died in December that year. And Merian & Co, the publishers, went to Mayall and said, the people of the UK want to support the Queen Victoria. They would like a copy of the photograph. And they came up with a financial deal based on the number that they could sell. And that was the equivalent of paying Mayall £2 million in today's money. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of these printed, and people collected them and kept them and put them into little albums. And then they wanted carte de visite. First of all, the rich people wanted their carte de visite, and then it sort of came down and down and down. And I have a carte de visite of my great grandfather, who was a glass blower in Yorkshire, but he wanted his carte de visite. It started this trend. Now, this is a later carte de visite. Can you see it's got a rounded corners to the edge of it? But look at the lady. Now, remember the first lady I showed you with the very tight hair, the one who was hanging on to the young child? But look at this lady's hair. It's quite soft. It's a bit sort of fluffy. It's piled up. It's not down. It's up. If she was wearing a hat, it would be a big hat, because her hair is up to support the hat. Yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? That we can think of what hat she's wearing without even there being a hat in the picture. But also look at what she's wearing. She's wearing very lightweight clothes. They're not the heavy Victorian clothes. They're also got hints of masculinity about them. There's a little collar, a little turned down collar and a tie. So we're actually moving into the period of emancipation, where sort of the formality of the Victorian period is starting to come to an end. It should still be corseted, but even there, it would be softer by this stage. And Frank Meadows Sutcliffe, the photographer of this, was a very famous British landscape photographer. And on the back of his cards, he puts of all the awards he's won. It's like, oh, this looks good, this looks good. It looks like I've got lots and lots of awards. When you look at the detail, one of them here is for the Royal Cornwall Polytechnic. So whilst he was at college, he won some photography award, but on the back of the card, it looked really good. Now in America, pardon me, there was a thing on photographs called the Sun Picture Tax. And this was a tax of 2, 3, 4, or 5 cents applied by the Internal Revenue in order to pay for the latter stages of the Civil War. So on this particular one, it's a 2-cent stamp, which would indicate it cost about 25 cents for the photograph. And I bought this in from America because I wanted an example for the book that James Ashworth got. And when it arrived, it was in an envelope and it was marked as being Thomas Jonathan Jackson. I immediately Googled that and it came back straight away, Stonewall Jackson, a Confederate Army general, one of the top ones. So I thought, wow, I've got this picture of this Confederate Army general, and which is quite a rarity. And I didn't pay an awful lot for it, so I was delighted. The only problem is the picture doesn't match the card in the sense that if it was Thomas Jonathan Jackson, i.e. Stonewall Jackson, he would have been dead for 3 years when the photograph was taken, because the stamp proves the date. The stamp is 1865-66. He was killed in 1863. So it is very unlikely that it's him. So when you're doing this dating, you've got to look at all the evidence and you've got to make certain that they all add together. Look for clues wherever you can find them. And on the back, there's often clues. Day in Electric Light Studios. It should be possible to find when electricity first arrived in your area. So if somebody's putting this on the back of a photograph, then it's a case of, well, they're not going to put it on before electricity's got there, and it won't be on long after everybody's got it, because once everybody's got it, there's no point in advertising it. There might be a location mentioned here, the Mersey Tunnel in Liverpool, and the nice easy job to work, find out when the Mersey Tunnel opened. That's your date when it can't be before that date. Appointments made by telephone. When did telephones arrive in that particular area? Enlargements from old and faded photographs. That's from a card in 1900. And photography had already been around for 60 years. So by 1900, those photographs are old photographs and people are copying them. We'll come on to that later. Now then, these are a couple of examples from Ontario. And just to sort of highlight how what I'm talking about applies to Canada just the same as it does to UK. And this is a carte de visite. And we can see straight away it's got square corners. The lady's got that tight parted hair, same as the lady, the first one I showed you, on the daguerreotype. And she's wearing a bell-shaped skirt. Now, we haven't looked at the skirts before, but briefly, I'll try and show you with my hands on my camera. If you think in terms of 1840, 50, the skirts tended to be sort of A-shaped, like a bell. As the time went by, as years went by, the front moves in and flattens, and the back moves out and up into a bustle. So it starts off bell-shaped and ends up as a bustle, and then it comes back down in the Edwardian period to being very, very thin into the pencil skirt. She's wearing a bell-shaped skirt, so it's early days. Also on the front, there's no name. That's really a good sign of it being an early one, because later on, there would be a name on the front, the photographer's name. And on the back, we've got a very, very simple design on the back. So this is going to be before 1870, probably not long after the invention of the photography, the carte de visite. So probably around about the 1860 to 1862. Here we have a later one from, this is from Toronto, and we've got rounded corners. We've got a fancy nameplate on the front. The hair is still quite tight, isn't it? She hasn't got what the young lady had at the studio in Whitby with the softer hair. So she's still got the quite hard hair. But look at the back. Look at the back. We've got really elaborate designs on the back. And it's saying that they've got patronage to the governor. So all of those things are all things that can be looked up, they can be researched if you're looking for a date. Now, on from the carte de visite, and this is the most important picture in this whole talk. So watch what happens next. This is an important bit. The cabinet card. Now, the cabinet card is about 4 times the area of a carte de visite. Okay. And when I was doing my first book, I wanted an example of a cabinet card. And I got this because it's from Bury, where I live. I live just near a place called Ramsbottom. This is Ramsbottom & Co. And I looked it up, and it was only in existence, that particular photographer, for 1 year in 1895. Wonderful, that's brilliant. But when I start to restore it and look at it in detail, what can I see? I see, oh, there's a line there across the top. That's where it's been stuck to the board. That is fine. I expect to see that line. What I don't expect to see is that orange curved line that goes over the top and down the side, which also occurs on the other side and across the bottom. And there is absolutely no marks on the original print. Yeah. So those lines, those orange lines, are not there on the surface of this print. They're in the image. And if those are in the image, it has to be a copy. Now, I go back and look at the lady and think, yeah, of course, those clothes are not 1895. It's more like 1865, 1870. So what's going on? This is what I think has happened. In 1865, 1870, she's had a carte de visite done, is taken home, is put into a carte de visite album, which almost always had arched tops to their spaces. It sits there for 30 years or thereabouts. She passes away, somebody inherits the album. The family want a copy of the image. They take it to Ramsbottom & Co., which had just opened up in 1895. They do an enlargement and they all have a copy. So the enlargement has no damage on it. The original does. And when you're coming to dating, both have to work together. Both the image and the actual product have to match. Otherwise, you know you've got a false one. Now then, postcards. Postcards, I'm not going to go into postcards in detail because it's a subject matter all to itself. And it is going to be in my next book. But just to show you something. Now, this is from 1915. And we think of photography as being, these days, you know, Instagram, filters here, there, and everywhere. 1915, this, okay, it's been hand tinted, that's fine, no problem there. Let's look at the lady's eyes. Her eyes have been retouched. The eyelashes have been added. The darkness around the eyes have been lightened. The line of her nose has been changed. The line of her lips has been changed. And her hair has been added. That's 1915. And we forget that professional photographers have always falsified images in one way or another. And only now are we actually able to see those. It's only by looking in detail at the image can we see the work that was done. It was so beautifully, finely painted on the negative or occasionally on the print. Here's another surefire sign of being a professional. The posing stand. I don't know whether you can see around the back of the guy's legs, the metal bars. Sure sign it's a long exposure and he's going to have a rod up his back, clamped around the waist and clamped around the neck in order to be able to keep him still. And with a man like this, it's quite straightforward. But what if it's a lady wearing a crinoline with a big bell shape? You can't get stand close enough to keep her still. In which case you have to go up the middle, inside the crinoline. And there were indeed things that were sort of like crinoline clamps, could be cranked up and down in order to be able to sort of get around somebody's waist. Whose job was it? Was it the photographer's assistant, lady in waiting, to say to Queen Victoria in 1862 when this was taken, excuse me, ma'am, but you're going to have a clamp up your crinoline? I would love to know, but she doesn't look very happy. Now then, 1888, film cameras turn up and revolutionize things, because suddenly you didn't have to go to a photographer to have your photograph taken. You could do it yourself. You just click the button. You press the button, we do the rest. That was Kodak's logo. And my granddad was a keen amateur photographer. That's him on the right, with a camera. Come back to that. There he is with his camera. It's one with a drop-down bellows and a cable release. That's my grandma standing up there. My mum is the little girl, and my mum's cousin is the older girl. Missing from the photograph is my uncle, who was 3 years older than my mum. Now then, this is where you put yourself outside the picture. Think outside the box. My granddad's got a camera in his hand. There must be two cameras. That makes common sense, doesn't it? My uncle is missing from the picture. He was older than my mum. So did he take the photograph with another camera? And the answer is absolutely 100% yes. Because only a few months ago, my second cousin, who is the grandson of the taller girl there, sent me this picture from York. And he said, oh, I've come across this picture. And there's my uncle without a camera, but his grandma has got the box brownie in her hand. So you see how by thinking outside the box, sometimes you can find this information out and really discover more about what went on the day. What was the dynamic of the day? Oh, I'll take a picture with my camera. You take a picture with the old camera. Now, this is a thing called printing out paper. And it was the most basic form of photographic paper there's ever been, printing. And basically it was, you had a piece of photographic paper, you had a contact print frame, you put the paper in contact with the negative and put it in the window. Leave it for 10 minutes, take it out and put it in some fixer, and you've got yourself your picture. Now, this particular one is a tiny little bit of paper, no more than a couple of inches, about 3 inches by 2 inches. But when I saw it, I was ready to throw it away. I couldn't see anybody on it that I recognized. Somebody recognized it who was being Bridlington, so I thought that's great. But other than that, not an awful lot of interest until I start restoring it. And I look at it and say, wow, look at the building in the background. It says on the roof, this is Snaps, Kodak Supplies. The posters on the wall say Kodak Samples. Send your photos home on a postcard. Hand your films to a photographer. The boats are called Young Tom and Vera May. This little bit of social history from the Yorkshire coast from about 1927. And I was ready to chuck it in the bin because there was nobody on I recognised. And yet it holds all those historical details. It tells us the story of these people going on holiday, probably for a day out. They could go and take their own photographs. They could take it to the shop and have it put on a postcard, and it'd probably be back home before they were. Now, these two are my great-grandparents. And people do say I look like my great-grandma, and probably I had a bit of a shave today, and I probably look a little bit like her, actually. But when I saw these two, these are off glass negatives taken by my granddad. When I first saw them, I assumed they were taken at the same time. You would, wouldn't you? They're in the same pose, taken at the same time. No, they're not. Look closely, look at the detail. The windows have been painted. The hollyhock on the right is not quite as tall as the hollyhock on the left. But the aspidistra in the window is much bigger on the right than it is in the left. And there's also another plant growing up across the front of the wall under the window. Just because they're consecutive in a box of negatives, they have the same pose, taken pretty much from the same place, by the same person, does not mean to say they were taken at the same time. You've got to look at the detail, look at what's surrounding it. And the more you do that, the more you'll get out of your pictures. Now, here's one. This is a totally true story about a photograph that was handed to me by a lady in Lancashire when I was doing a live talk a few years ago. Apologies, James, you will have seen this in the book. Now, when she handed it to me, she said, what can I tell her about it? And I said, it's a ferrotype. It's got a corner missing out of it. It's a bit crinkly. And I had a feeling straight away that it was American. I couldn't be certain, but I thought it was. I get it home. I look to restore it a bit. Turn it round the right way. Remember, it's back to front. So I've turned it round the right way. You can see the pocket handkerchief now is on the correct side. I start working my way around the picture to look at the detail, to restore it and get the most out of it I can. And I can see in the picture that that gentleman, that one, and that one, oh, that's fairly faint, but yeah, it is there, have all got rings on their little fingers on their left hands. So like the picture of my grandma, my brain kicks in and says, why? Why would they all have a ring on their little finger on their left hand? There's no evidence on right hands, just the left hand. I Googled it and it came back that they were either gay or gang members in America. I look back at them and I think they didn't look gay. They don't look like brothers. They don't look like businessmen particularly. Cowboys in America didn't wear 10-gallon hats. They wore derbies and bowlers because they were better on for being on horseback. So who were these people? Are they cowboys? Maybe. Now look again at the detail and look at the guy's watch winder. It's a miniature Colt 45. I went back to the lady who owned it and told her what I thought, and she said, well, I don't think any of my relatives have been to America. And she came to the house and she brought with her a little album of carte de visites, and in the album was this photograph. Now at this stage, I'd spent probably 3-4 hours looking at her relatives. She hadn't. I said, that's the same man. That's the man that had the watch winder. Okay, taken at a different time, but that's the same fella. And she said, but that's my great uncle, whatever it was. He's never been to America. I persuaded her we could take the picture out of the album and prized it out gently. And on the back, it said Providence, RI, Rhode Island. And even the font, the photographic studio and the Westminster Street, even those look like wanted posters. I then, quite by chance, bought a book on colorizing photographs called The Color of Time by a lady in San Francisco. And in it were classic photographs that she had colored. And in amongst them was this photograph. And straight away I went, whoa, hang on a minute, that looks very familiar. The pose, the outfits that they're wearing, the fact that all bar one have got rings on their little finger on their left hand. Why? Who is it? The one at the front on the right-hand side in the grey suit is Butch Cassidy. The one in the middle is the Sundance Kid. And it turns out that Butch Cassidy's family came from Accrington in Lancashire, which is about 10 miles north of here. And here we have sort of, I won't say proof, but in a way it legitimizes what I'm trying to do, where we look for these details. I'm going to now just show you on an ordinary photograph how to do it. So here we have a photograph of my granddad. And what I'm going to do is not use any special equipment or anything like that. There's no trickery involved. It's just asking the questions. So we start looking at the picture. Now, the things you need to know, some of you, I've already told you that my granddad was a keen amateur photographer. He was married with 2 children, and he had been in the war, in the First World War, and ended in 1919, in fact, not 1918. But let's look at the picture. It's taken by a street photographer, a walking photographer, who stayed in one place with his camera, taking photographs and trying to sell the photographs to the passerby. Okay. So my granddad is passing him by and he takes his photograph and he says, I want a copy of that. Right, keep that in mind. He's carrying flowers. He's carrying flowers in the way that a bloke carries flowers. He's not cradling them, he's sort of holding them down a bit, isn't he? Slightly self-consciously. But he's got flowers. What are the occasions that he would be carrying flowers? He'd be carrying flowers if somebody was sick, maybe if somebody died, if somebody got married, if he was in the bad books with the wife. It's a fairly restricted number of times you would carry flowers. His shoes are polished. Okay. Now, my granddad, as I say, was in the First World War, and all the way through his life afterwards, his shoes would have been polished. It was just one of those things. So that's nothing unusual, but note it. He's wearing his watch chain medals. Now, I actually have those. I inherited those. And I know that they're for Sunday school attendance, cricket and football. And the latest one was 1912. Okay, so we know it's got to be after 1912. We know it's got to be after 1919, to be honest, but that's another matter. Oh, hang on, we're not looking at him now, we're looking at the lady. So we're not looking at the point of interest. We're moving away. We're near shops. We're near shops because at this point in time, not many people would have had a car. They'd have gone on a tram or a bus to the shops. And she's near shops where she would get groceries. There are large railings on the right-hand side, the sort you get outside of big municipal buildings, town halls, schools, hospitals, places like that. It's not the sort you would get at domestic ones. And by 1939, those would have gone. They'd all be cut down at the time of the Second World War. He's not wearing a coat. Now, does that mean it's summertime? Maybe. On a very wide pavement. Where he lived, there was no wide pavements. He lived with his mum and dad, and you saw the picture of the little cottage they lived in. There was no street outside the front. It was just a dirt track. And if we look at the shadow on the floor, we can see the shadow is really quite short. So it's probably midday-ish, summertime. So it's midday, it's summertime. He's in a town or a city. He's not far from shops. He's in his Sunday best. His shoes are polished. He's carrying flowers. He's happy enough to have his photograph taken and pay for it. If he was going to visit somebody who was sick or dying or something like that, he probably wouldn't feel happy enough to have his photograph taken. It's a bit crass, that, isn't it? But who's missing from the picture? Well, his wife's missing from the picture. There's no children in the picture. So here's a scenario. Is he visiting his wife in hospital in the local town who's just had their first baby. And that would have been August the 9th, 1920. If it was his second, that would have been February 1923. And I'm sure the son would not have been in that position in February 1923. So we can't be certain. I don't know where the squirrel is, but what I can do is to look at those details. I can look at what's going on around them and assess why that photograph was taken. And finally, when we look at those old photographs, we don't really look back in time, do we? Because we're seeing them as black and white. And when James earlier mentioned about colorization, I realized that in order to be able to see our ancestors better, it was worth my while to try and colorize them, to really spend the time working on them. But I also realized that just spending the time thinking about what color they were actually helped as well. Because when we look at the photograph, we look immediately in black and white, we immediately look at them at their faces. And not to think what else is going on. We probably wouldn't realize in black and white that it was a wedding photograph, especially because we're used to sort of white wedding dresses. But when we see the flowers highlighted like that, suddenly it takes on a new form. This lady from 1863, it's off an ambrotype, a small little ambrotype. I have that here, and it's only a little bit of glass, yeah. But what if you spent some time with a magnifying glass and you thought, what colours is she wearing? What colour were those dresses? And you see the hair behind her head, you see the fringe, you see the big sleeves, the fact that she's actually got a wristwatch on. All those little things suddenly bring it to life. Now on this one, I can see you, Peggy, at the top. And if you wanted to, you can unmute yourself on this one. We're coming to the end. What colour is she wearing? Or colours is she wearing?
It's hard to see.
Do you think? No, there isn't any colour there. It's sepia. But what colour do you think it was?
For the time, it's probably a muted color, like a gray.
Okay. Is Ted there? Ted Dixon? Do you want to unmute yourself? We'll have a contest. What colour, Ted, do you think this lady is wearing, or would have been wearing? You're still on mute, Ted. Oh, that doesn't matter.
The front looks velvet.
It is. Exactly. Whoever said that one, it is velvet certainly on the front part. The slashed inner part is velvet. And if you think, Peggy, about the dress, those sort of floral devices that are on it would not indicate actually something that's quite dull. It's something that's quite flamboyant. She's got the velvet slash. She's got the velvet lapels, and with the lace around the edges. We forget that the Victorians particularly were a lot more into colour. Think of the houses that they lived in, insofar as, you know, the amount of colour that would be in that living room, more than we put in our living rooms today. So it's far more likely to be something vibrant. Exactly. And I've got a lot of books here from places like the Victoria and Albert Museum and so on, with original dresses, which really show that in actual fact, there were trends for dyes. So that sort of, like that lady previously, if I just go back to this one, the blue dye then suddenly became used an awful lot because it was available. When the scientists had invented the dye, then everybody wanted that colour. And there was a whole period in the latter Victorian period where artificial dyes were being created and people jumped on it to create their clothes. But by spending that time and thinking about how it looks in colour, we can start to sort of see more and more detail. We see the fact that, look at his trousers. There isn't a crease in the trousers, but there is a fold. Now, creases, sharp creases in trousers didn't come until about the 1890s. But at this stage, there is a part of a crease, if you like, in his trousers. So all these little things, when you spend time looking, you will get an awful lot more out of your pictures. And we've come to the end. So the last thing is to show you that video again and see who the observant ones were. And this time there will be no young lady walking across. So I'll just set the video going. There we go. It started. And start to watch what happens. Nothing much straight away. She hasn't appeared yet, but she's now going to appear just about now. Or she did do. Oh, hang on a second. That car's changed to a taxi. The van changed to a taxi. What happened next? She's still walking across, or she would have been, but she's not there anymore. Oh, hang on a second. That lamppost changed and the bike appeared. That wasn't there before. What happens next? This is all while she was walking across. Believe me, somebody's appeared in the doorway. And what comes next? I think by the time she gets to the other side, things suddenly start to happen. Oh, yes, that all happened. Every single one of those changes that you just saw happened while she was walking across. Now, you don't believe me, but honestly, they did. And because I directed you to look at her, you missed what was going on. And if you think about it, looking at the old photographs of your family, you see somebody you love, somebody you know, somebody you think you know, somebody that is an ancestor of yours, and you just don't bother looking at the rest of it. And there's all that detail going on around it, which is going to give you more information, more historical information, more contextual information, which will make your own photographs more interesting to you and to everybody else. So that's it. I shall stop sharing and we can go to any questions.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I found that very interesting. And you're right. You don't see everything when you're looking if you're not actually looking.
Exactly.
I have a question. Sorry. I have a
Go
question.
ahead, Murray.
I have an ancestor that lived in Gateshead, Durham, and then up in Ashington, Northumberland. And he was a professional photographer for about 50 years. I've Googled it. I'm just wondering, are there any websites or books on the old photographers? What would have happened to all the pictures he took? This being one of them.
Right. Okay, we've got a rounded corner CDV. So that's post 1870.
I got this from the archives.
Right. Okay. What would have happened to me? The vast majority, unfortunately, end up getting trashed. Although the National Portrait Gallery in London and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London do hold extensive collections, it is one of those unfortunate things that photographers tend not to make good business people. And if I have a book here of photographers in Lancashire between 1840 and 1940, there's 4,000 in that period just in Lancashire. And many of them only lasted a year, 2 years. 50 years is an awful long time for a photographer. But what happens to the output in most cases, it has to be said, the resulting negatives are probably lost, unfortunately. There's very, 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 very few that are maintained. If it was such a long period of time, he would have gone on to film. And unfortunately, early films up to from 1880s through to 1930s, the films tend to be on a film base which is very, very flammable. There was sort of elements of, I think it's nitroglycerin in the base, and certainly early cine films had the nitro base, and those now have to be extremely carefully handled by highly trained people. Otherwise, they can spontaneously combust. So early films, if it was on glass, almost certainly would just be trashed. If they're on film, they may be saved, but they would have to be saved by specialists. If there's any sort of large quantities of nitroglycerin-based film around, they are in danger of spontaneously combusting, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Great presentation.
Thank you. And who's next?
David, Paul Eagles here. I want to thank you for something. I'm the repository of family photos since 1855. I have hundreds of them, but I have lots of black and white photos from the 1910s and 20s. And what you have just shown me is who took the pictures and what they were taken with. I often tried to figure out what was this for, and you just went, da! Now I know where this picture of my father at 6 months old in 1915 came from. It's
Right.
from the camera.
Yeah.
And the patent at the back says 1902. I just don't.
Okay.
Thank you.
If it's 1902, it'd probably be a Kodak 1A, I think, something like that.
Right.
The very, very early ones, if anybody comes across photographs, family photographs that are round, in other words, the image is round, not the print, but the image is round, they were off the very first manufacture of Kodak cameras, because the very first ones only produced round images, but there were 100 images per camera, per roll, but it was sealed in the camera, and you had to take it back to the shop where you got it when you finished taking the photographs. It was then, you were then given a new camera loaded with new film, and the camera went off to Kodak to be processed. But you constantly got this new camera system. And then later you could change the camera yourself, you could change the film. But in the early days you couldn't. But the one you've got there is the later one. The first camera I ever used was one of those, and that was in 1960, the first time I took any photographs, and that was still on one of those cameras.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. And who's next?
Ethan,
Miles.
I'm Rod. I'm talking across somebody, sorry.
Go ahead, Roger.
I'm Roger Suffling. Thank you very much for a terrific presentation here. I'd sort of begun down the path that you've followed a long way, and I'm looking at all the clues that I found and all the clues I missed, and it's just fascinating. However, I'm frustrated with some of my family photos. My mum was very diligent, and she pasted them all into albums, and so all the information on the back, like things that were handwritten or photographers' names and so on, it's all hidden under there. And I want to get them off, but I'm scared of damaging them. I don't want to put them in the bath and whatever. You know, what's the best approach to doing that?
It's a very tricky one, is that, because without knowing what kind of glue that has been used, you don't know what kind of solvent in order to be able to unstick it. One thing you might try, and that is, if you get some tissue paper and an iron, only a warm iron, not a hot iron, warm enough so that it might just hurt your hand but not burn you, that kind of warm, certainly no hotter than that. and with a piece of tissue paper, just gently put on one photograph that is not as important, put the iron onto the paper, and it's just possible that the glue that would have been used might have been one that was heat sensitive. If you think about many of the early glues, they were put on whilst warm, and if it is, it might just warm it up enough to gently peel it off. But as I say, try it on one that's not an important one, and only hot enough so that if you put it on your hand, it might just hurt but not burn. It must not be hot, otherwise you'll damage the picture. But warm enough just to melt the surface underneath. It might just work. But that's the only thing I could suggest.
Do you have any details of that in your books?
No, I've never been asked for it before. But it's a good point.
I might email you and maybe we could.
I'm writing book 3 at the moment, so I might put it in there.
Thank you.
Hugh, you had a question?
I was just pointing out that Mary Miles was
Yes.
holding up a roundish photograph.
I hold up these two.
All right, yes. Well, that's not the photograph that's round, it's just the way they've been cut.
Oh, I see.
Those very early ones were the image itself, the negative, produced a round image. And anybody here, I mean, you say you're a scientific university, think about the very early lenses. The corners of the lenses were not particularly well made, especially on that cheap camera that Kodak produced. So the way round it was to produce a round image, just like a telescope, rather than trying to have one that was good enough to get into the corners and keep sharp and keep the correct exposure all around the edges. That part is actually quite difficult to do. And it's not only in the more expensive lenses do you get that. So the way they got around it was by having a dirt cheap lens and having a round image. Excuse me. So it's just a round print, usually quite small as well. You're only about 2 inches at the most.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, please.
David?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you very much. This has been a truly fascinating presentation. Probably the best Zoom presentation I've ever seen. And like most of us, I've seen a lot of them. This has been absolutely fascinating. But as a rank amateur, but one who loves old pictures and genealogy and so on, I was stunned by the difference when you colorize them.
Yes.
And is that something that can be done at home by someone?
I did say, yeah,
program, or is that a real piece of art?
I'll answer it in 2 ways. And James asked about this originally, so I will just do it give it a little bit of air. There are 2 sides to this. One is that there is a big push at the moment by a number of software companies to be able to automatically colorize. In Photoshop, even now, there is a colorize neural filter. And it's not bad. It's very good with faces. It sort of seems to know, sort of what a face looks like. And if it knows and it can tell that it's skin, it looks like skin. What it doesn't know is what we know. So, for instance, I tried it the other day on a photograph, which is from 1940, of a lady posting a letter in a British letterbox, and that letterbox would be bright red, and it came out as blue because it didn't know what it was, and it thought that's a big lump of metal. I'll make it blue. Excuse me. But as I say, sort of for faces, it's actually not too bad. There's also online systems which can do the same, where you upload it, it colorizes it, and you can download it again. However, this is where the big however comes in. If we're interested in what we are dealing with in the past and what we're handing to the future, then those systems are really falsifying what we're handing on. And we have to be very, very careful. You'll notice, James, in the book, that I've put the original black and white in at the same time as the color. So you can see what I've done. You can see what the original looked like in sepia or black and white, and also what I've colorized. I'm not just giving you the colored version. There's two reasons for that. One is so that you can make up your own mind, am I right? But also to make certain it's still in context with the original. And if you just take it out of context, you get blue telephone boxes or, you know, post boxes and so on. All mine is done the fact that I was an art student originally. So I'm, you know, painting, oil painting, watercolor painting. I have probably about 40 books up on my shelves here, most of which are on fashion in one form or another, a lot of which have information in color plates. As I say, the Victorian Albert Museum in London, some of their books show the original costumes and what they looked like. So I use a lot of reference material, military reference material, etc. So the answer is twofold. One is the automatic color systems that are available are fun. You can have a good laugh. You can use them, you know, sort of as a byproduct, but do not use them for any longevity in so far as they are really falsifying. I'm falsifying probably, but I'm falsifying from a position of strength, a position of knowledge. And unfortunately, artificial intelligence is not that intelligent yet. Like I say, it can tell you what a skin color is, but it won't tell you what color shirt you're wearing. Only the research can do that. So I hope that answers the question. Mine's all in Photoshop. It's all done with one of these pads and pens, so that I'm really doing it as I would have been doing it in the old-fashioned way with a pen, but it's actually going straight onto screen. And I don't use a scanner. Now, again, for any of you technical people, I shall show you my system. Oh, it's not there. Where's it gone? Oh, it's here. I was recording a show earlier, so for a UK show, so I was using this to record myself. But I don't use a scanner because all scanners are designed to work with large originals for A4 or A3 and so on. If I show a scanner that, it doesn't really see enough of the detail. A digital camera sees it all, irrespective of whether it's the size of a fingernail or the size of a mountain. It produces the same file size. And so the photographs that I work on can be blown up huge, as big as a mountain, or as a landscape photograph. And I can see exactly the detail, and it doesn't need a fancy copy stand like mine. That was about 70 quid second hand. It's a bit sticky, but it's sturdy, because I use it a lot. So in actual fact, if you've got a decent SLR, or even these days a good quality smartphone, I would use that rather than a scanner, because the actual end product was probably better. So, so keep these things in mind. Don't ditch the scanner, but if you have got a camera, invest in a small little copy bench for a few pounds or a few dollars, and you'll actually get a really good result.
Mm-hmm.
Sue?
Yeah, I found this in the basement. My husband's gone now. It's a huge, big picture. Yeah. And on the back, it's in London. It's his, I don't know who it is. His aunt, she never married. She's would have been over 100 now, but it's a really big blown up picture and the dress on there. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Would that be ancient?
No. What size hat would she wear?
She's not got a hat on.
I know, but what size hat would she wear?
I
No idea.
But her hair's loose. Not much I noticed.
Okay.
Suffragette era.
But the dress, the outfit
Okay.
is old.
Do you know what I mean by a cloche hat?
Not a posh?
Do you know what I mean by a cloche hat?
No.
A cloche hat is like a beanie.
Oh, okay.
It was around in the 1920s.
Okay.
Wear one of those because the hair's too big. If it was earlier, when the hats were big, she
Yeah.
needs big hair. She's got big hair to hold up a big
Yeah.
hat.
Okay.
So that gives us a clue of the date. I mean, obviously, when you see it's being waved around, it's a bit difficult, but
Sorry.
it's all right. The period when enlargements were done was when, this may sound strange, when film and glass plates and so on were in their heyday and enlargers were invented. So people could get enlargements, and that tended to be
Okay.
not before about 1880. I would say from the outfit that she's wearing, the hair and the size, you're probably around about 1905, that sort of period.
Wow.
So
Okay.
just into the Edwardian period.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just had to go blow the dust off it in the basement.
Okay, we probably have time for about one more question, if anybody has one.
Yeah.
Oh, look at the bottom there.
Oh, down the bottom?
Look at, is it?
Mary Lynn?
Mary Lynn?
Yes, I've got a photo that actually, I don't know whether it is a photo. It's on curved glass and it's of the Parliament buildings. And it looks like it's been maybe touched up with color from an original painting or a picture.
Okay. Is that Toronto?
It's the Parliament buildings in Ottawa.
Ottawa. And what date were they?
Oh, well, they were around 1867, I guess. Were they built shortly after Confederation?
Think so.
Right, it was, let me have a look. Oop, no, that's not it. Parliament buildings,
They burned down in the First World War years.
1866.
Quite a bit of
Okay.
that would be newer.
Okay, we've got 1866, the date it was built. The things you can find out from here is amazing. Just show it again, please, and put it in front of and keep talking so it comes up on my screen.
Okay, so it is painted right on the curved glass. It's not behind curved glass, it's right on the glass. And it has like a black background.
Right, okay. What they have almost certainly done is to have an enlarged photograph, pardon me, to use as a almost like as a template, which has then been painted on and is probably being fitted then on the back of the glass, rather than it being painted directly onto the glass, because they've had to do it in reverse, which would have been very difficult to do. But it's very unusual. You would expect it to be pretty early on after the buildings were built, which sort of could fit in to maybe around about 1870. It would certainly be possible. And or it may have been a commemorative type thing, you know, a few years later, if it had been open for 10 years or something like that. I don't know is the honest answer, but it's very unusual. But it is more like, as you say, a painting rather than a photograph, but it would have been based on a photograph.
I think the Peace Tower was built in 1927.
That's a comment from Karen Ledrew, right?
Ellsworth.
I wouldn't have thought the picture was that old. I would have thought it was older, but I might be. I mean, I don't know. I just went on to Google.
It has been painted from a photograph and the piece are added in.
Yeah, it is very unusual. Put it that way. I've not seen one like that particularly before.
It is.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we have a question from Sherry Hartung. Any suggestions on what to do with old family photos when there's no family to move them on to?
Ooh, good question.
Right, good, very good question. It depends. Now, what I mean by it depends is if you've got photographs which are purely individual people, then there's not an awful lot you can do. Although saying that, I buy photographs like that all the time. I probably buy 10 a week. And there's a lot of people on the internet who do that through eBay because I'm writing the books and I need to have those originals for it. But if there's something else like that picture of Bridlington where there is social documentation, it may be the clothes that they're wearing, it may be what job they're doing, that type of thing, then local history museums would be quite happy to take them off your hands. They probably won't, as I say, take them all, but if there's something that is a social document, then yeah, they're worth keeping, and local history libraries and archives would be the place to go.
Great, thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Okay, it's just about 3 o'clock. So thank you, Stephen.
Yes, I'm absolutely starving now. So Ted's had his tea. I'm going to have my his dinner. I'm going to have my dinner.
Great presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, and all the best to Canada. Bye bye.